There is a number. Most people would never think to fear inside a normal bank account. It is not a number the government prints on a warning label. It is not a number your bank circles in red when you open the account. It is not even a number most people would connect to risk at all. But once your cash balance moves into that zone, the relationship changes in a way you cannot see from the outside. Your debit card still works, your mobile app still loads, your statement still looks clean, and that is exactly why people miss what matters until the exact moment they need the money most. If I were sitting across from you today and you told me you had $20,000 parked in a plain checking or savings account because you wanted to be safe, I would tell you something very simple. Safe according to whom? Because the average depositor thinks a bank account. The bank does not think that way. The depositor thinks, this is my money sitting there waiting for me. The bank thinks, this is a deposit relationship governed by an agreement. Most customers have never read, subject to rights the institution can exercise without first educating the customer on how serious those rights become under pressure. That gap between what you think the account is and what the bank knows the account is, that gap is where the trouble lives. Now let me be careful. I am not telling you that every bank is hunting ordinary customers. I am not telling you that if you hold cash in a bank, disaster is guaranteed. I am telling you something narrower and more important. The legal structure of an ordinary bank account is very different from the mental picture most people carry in their heads. And when money gets tight, when a payment gets disputed, when an account gets reviewed, when access matters more than yield, the fine print becomes real faster than you expect. That is why this specific number matters, not because $20,000 appears in federal law as some magic line, not because FDIC rules suddenly change at that exact balance. They do not. And not because the government flags you simply for keeping that amount in the bank. That is not what this is. What matters is that once you become a deposit-heavy customer without also being a profitable borrowing customer, the bank begins to see you through a different lens. A person with a decent savings balance, no mortgage at that institution, no car loan, no revolving interest that enriches the bank, no meaningful debt relationship, is not the golden customer. Most people imagine you are not a hero in the profitability model. You are a deposit-only relationship. And if the bank is paying you interest on that cash while needing to deploy your money elsewhere at a higher return to make the relationship work, you are not the customer the system was designed to reward. You are the customer the agreement was designed to manage. That is the right phrase. Manage. Most people never read these agreements because normal banking life trains you not to. The first page is harmless. The app is convenient. The marketing is warm. The language that matters lives in the middle sections, buried behind dull headings, legal cross-references, and sentences that sound like they were designed to anesthetize the reader before the actual point appears. I have spent enough time around contracts to know that the most important sentence is usually the one written to look the least important. And if you are serious about protecting yourself, you have to learn to read for power, not for tone. So let me translate the 4 clauses that matter most. The first is the right of offset. This is the clause that shocks people the hardest because it destroys the clean mental boundary most customers think exists between their deposit account and their debt. If you owe money to the same bank where you keep your savings, on a credit card, a personal loan, a line of credit, in some cases even on an obligation that is still technically current, the bank can apply funds from your deposit account against that obligation. Not after a dramatic courtroom scene, not after a long collection process, not after a courtesy explanation that leaves you time to rearrange your cash. The offset happens first, the explanation comes later. That is the part people do not understand until it is already over. They think current means protected. They think disputed means paused. They think not yet due means not yet touchable. But banks do not write broad rights into agreements because they plan to explain them gently in the moment. They write them because they want room to act when acting serves them. And if you have ever held credit card balances or any form of debt at the same institution where you keep your emergency cash, you should understand what that means. Your emergency fund and your debt are not separated by the wall you imagine. They are living inside one legal ecosystem that alone should change how you think. For years, I would have told you this clause was real, but mostly background noise. Then I heard from someone who had spent years handling escalated customer service inside a major retail bank. Her description was not theatrical. That made it more powerful, not less. She did not describe a freak event. She described a category of calls so common, her department had language ready for it. Customers were not discovering a rare exception. They were discovering a capability the bank had always had and the customer had never really believed could be used the way it was written. That is when my own view changed. Not because the clause was new, because I finally understood the difference between a right existing on paper and a right being operational in practice. The second clause is about access after money arrives. This one matters because people assume that once a deposit shows up in the account, especially a large deposit, the important part is done. The money is here. The danger has passed. That is not always true. Banks have broad authority under their agreements and internal policies to extend holds on incoming funds under specific conditions. And one of the moments when this becomes very real is when a large incoming deposit lands in an account already holding a meaningful balance. Now, your statement may show the money, your app may display the higher number, your account may look richer on screen, but availability is not the same thing as visibility. That distinction hurts people because it feels absurd until it happens to them. The money is mine. I can see it. So why can I not use it? Because the bank's operating model does not treat display as the same thing as access. And when hold rights get exercised, you can end up in the most frustrating category of modern finance. Legally funded, practically restricted. That is an ugly place to be, especially if you are counting on that money to close a transaction, handle an emergency, or move quickly in a moment when speed matters. A delay of several business days sounds minor until you realize business days are not life days. They do not count weekends. They do not care that your deadline falls on a Friday. They do not care that a family problem arrived at the wrong time. That is what people miss. In normal times, a delay is an annoyance. A delay becomes a problem. The third clause is the bank's right to close or restrict the account relationship itself. Now, most people hear that and think, well, surely there has to be a dramatic reason, fraud, crime, something extreme. Not necessarily. The language in many deposit agreements gives the institution the right to close the account or restrict activity with or without advance notice for reasons that may never be fully explained to you in real time. Again, people hear that and say, yes, but they would return my money. Of course they would. Maybe, but how? That is the question. Because if the standard return mechanism is not an instant wire into your next account, but a paper check mailed to the address on file, then you are dealing with a form of ownership that is technically intact and practically delayed. The check exists, the money is still yours, but now you are waiting for mail. Then you are depositing that check somewhere else. Then you are subject to the receiving institution's own hold rules. And suddenly your perfectly healthy cash position has been turned into a two-stage waiting game you never volunteered for. Again, normal times make this sound manageable. Stress times reveal how fragile it feels when you are calm. Paperwork is an inconvenience. When you urgently need access, paperwork becomes pressure. That is the difference between legal ownership and functional liquidity. Retirees especially need to understand that difference. Because retirement is not just about having money. It is about knowing what money is available right now. Not in theory, not after processing, not after the next statement cycle. Right now, if you lose that clarity, you lose peace of mind with it. Now we come to the fourth clause, or really the fourth mechanism, and this is the one that changes how the first three read, because it reminds you that your ordinary savings account has never simply been sitting still in the way you imagined. Banks have long used internal classification systems and balance sheet treatment rules that ordinary customers never see and never need to see in daily life. What matters is not that your balance visibly vanishes. It usually does not. What matters is that the institution is constantly viewing your money through a regulatory and profitability lens that has almost nothing to do with how you emotionally relate to the account. You think, this is my reserve. The bank thinks, this is a liability we have to manage against regulatory requirements, funding conditions, reserve treatment, deployment opportunities, and margin. That is why I have said for years that the single most dangerous sentence in personal finance is this one. My money is just sitting there. No, it is not. It is legally owed to you. That is not the same thing. And if you do not understand the difference, you are not really thinking like an owner. You are thinking like a passenger who has mistaken a contract for a promise of comfort. The account agreement is not a service brochure. It is a permission structure. That is the phrase I want burned into your head. A permission structure, it defines what the bank may do, what timelines it controls, what flexibility it retains, and how little it must surface those powers in the smooth, ordinary flow of everyday banking. Once you see the agreement that way, everything changes. Now, the obvious question is, what do you do with that information? Well, first, you stop treating a big idle cash balance at one institution as automatically harmless. Second, you stop pairing large savings with meaningful debt at the same institution, unless you are absolutely certain you understand the consequences. Third, you stop assuming visible money is the same as immediately available money. Fourth, you stop pretending that retirement safety is just a question of principal preservation. It is also a question of access, timing, flexibility, and legal structure. That is why a person can be financially solvent and still feel financial stress, because solvency does not guarantee usability, and usability is what matters when life turns fast. I am not going to give you some fake universal number and say this is the exact right cash balance to keep at one bank. That would be irresponsible. The right number depends on the rest of your setup, your time horizon, your liquidity needs, your debt relationships, your age, your temperament, and whether the money is there to sit or there to move. But I can tell you the question most people never ask until too late. What rights did I give away when I signed something I did not read because everybody told me it was routine? That is the real question, and routine is a dangerous word in finance. People trust routine because it feels like normalcy. Most financial mistakes are not made in moments of obvious danger. They are made in long stretches of convenience. Nobody worries when the app is working. Nobody studies the agreement when the card clears at dinner. Nobody thinks deeply about availability clauses while interest is arriving on schedule. The danger is not that the clause appears suddenly. The danger is that it has been there the whole time and only becomes visible when your need becomes urgent. That is why this matters so much for retirees and near retirees. When you are young, you can survive a few inefficiencies. You can absorb bad timing. You can rebuild. When you are older, liquidity is not abstract. It is medicine. It is travel for family. It is emergency repairs. It is peace of mind. It is the line between feeling secure and feeling trapped. That is why I have always preferred structures that make the chain of control obvious. Short-term treasuries are simple. Cash ladders across institutions are simple. Keeping debt and core liquidity separated is simple. Simple is underrated because simple feels boring. But boring is exactly what protects you when the world stops being boring. The truth is, banks do not fear customers with $20,000 because those customers are dangerous. Banks dislike relationships that are balance, heavy, and profit. Light because the economics are less attractive. That is a business fact, not a moral accusation. But once you understand that, you stop taking the relationship personally, and once you stop taking it personally, you start building your finances around structure instead of sentiment. That is the whole game. You do not need to panic. You do not need to treat every bank as the enemy. You do need to stop being lazy about the legal architecture around your cash. Read the offset section, read the hold section, read the termination section, then ask yourself a question that matters far more than yield. If this institution exercised every right I signed away inside the agreement, would I still be okay? If the answer is no, you have work to do. And the best time to do that work is before the clause matters, not after. That is how real financial safety works. Not by hoping powerful institutions behave exactly the way your mental model says they should, but by structuring your life so that if they behave exactly the way the contract says they can, you are still standing. That is the difference between being comforted by the banking system and being prepared for it.